Starting off this countdown, we have Real Monsters. This show is about monsters in training. Ickis, Crumb, and Oblina are all monsters who attend a school to learn how to frighten humans. Now, the design of these monsters alone are terrifying. Let's start off with the scariest looking one, Crumb. Just look at him. Okay, he's a weird creature that literally has detached eyes, so he's always stuck holding them in the air. And then he's just covered in hair and looks disturbing. His scare tactic is to use his grossness to frighten humans. Next, we have Oblina. Oblina is a long black and white serpent looking monster. She can contort her body in many ways and can scare humans with her teeth, lips, and tongue. Then you have Ickis, who looks like a little gremlin. Ickis can become red and his teeth turn sharp when he scares people. These monsters alone are they're horrifying. But honestly, I applaud the animators. Like, they definitely got creative with these characters. Like, who comes up with this naked looking dude that's holding up his eyes? Incredible. In our fourth spot, we have Tales from the Cryptkeeper. I'm sure all you 90s kids remember this show, because I certainly do. So this show was inspired by the comic series and the adult HBO show Tales of the Crypt. They then altered it to make it child friendly. So they removed the blood and the gore from the live action show, but there were still some episodes that were quite horrifying, especially for young children. Alright, so the Cryptkeeper plays the host of the show who introduces what each episode is going to be about. The series then goes on and talks about classic legends like vampires, zombies, and werewolves, so on. Now, in the episode titled The Weeping Woman, Camille and Mildred visit a haunted Victorian mansion. At night, they are woken up by creepy moaning and objects flying around. That's when they see the Weeping Woman, an old, eyeless, and teethless woman with scraggly gray hair and long black nails. The second night, the woman looks even more terrifying with red glowing eyes. She ends up chasing the girls around the house. Then you have the episode titled Sharon Share-alike. This is an episode about a girl named Shauna who refuses to share her toys with her little sister Katie. As a result, she hides one of her old toy dolls in the vent so her sister can't play with it. Then the doll ends up coming alive and haunting her. This episode is freaking creepy, with the doll just coming alive and saying things like, "You're not nice, I don't like you," in that creepy doll voice. The doll ends up chasing her all over the house, giggling and chanting her name. If you find dolls creepy, then that episode is not for you. Moving on, at number 3, we have Ren and Stimpy. Ren and Stimpy is another classic cartoon. This one is known to be more dark and twisted. So Ren and Stimpy is a satirical animated show about Ren, an aggressive, mentally unstable chihuahua, and Stimpy, a dim-witted cat. Now, okay, yes, I understand, the show is meant to be more dark for the sake of comedy, but there are still moments where people have definitely been creeped out. In fact, one episode of Ren and Stimpy titled Man's Best Friend was banned from Nickelodeon because of its extreme violence. But yet, that's not the only episode that's been filled with explicit content. In the episode titled Stimpy's Fan Club, Ren and Stimpy receive a bunch of fan mail. However, it's all for Stimpy and none for Ren. That night, Ren goes completely insane from the jealousy. He stays awake, talking to himself and feeling guilt for writing letters back, insulting the fans. In this scene, they actually make a really clever reference to the play of Macbeth, with Ren claiming that his hands are dirty and the dirt won't come off. The episode continues with him planning to murder Stimpy in his sleep by snapping his neck. His brain then begins to sting and swell before he's engulfed by the flames of hell. Oh, did that rhyme? It did. In another episode titled Rubber Nipple Salesman, Ren and Stimpy own a rubber nipple business and go door to door in their neighborhood to sell their product. They knock on the door of one house and a horse answers the door. This horse is clearly a deranged killer. He ends up looking at them and saying, "Maybe I should make another mistake. Maybe 2 more." The way he says it is just way more creepier. Then he pulls out a walrus and asks them if they have any rubber walrus protectors. The walrus begs them to call the police. Okay, it's actually quite hilarious, but then if you think about it, very, very creepy. In our second spot, we have Martin Mystery. Honestly, I love this show. It's really well done. It's like the perfect balance between comedy, mystery, and horror. And can't lie, I had a little crush on Martin, but I know I wasn't the only one. So this show surrounds Martin Mystery and Diana Lombard, 2 16-year-old step-siblings that work for an organization referred to as the Center. Basically, their job is to solve cases and protect people from supernatural threats. And we can't forget about Java, a 200,000-year-old caveman that also helps them with their investigations. So there are multiple episodes that are just completely messed up. The one that I remember giving me nightmares when I was younger is the episode titled Revenge of the Doppelganger. Basically in this episode, women are being attacked by some kind of electrical shadow that completely erases their faces. Again, I'm rhyming, I'm so good. Okay. In the episode, this creature attacks multiple women that all have similar features and steals their faces, leaving them looking like creepy mannequins. And then we have the episode The Body Swappers, which is a reference to the movie The Thing. This episode begins with a young girl fleeing for her life from some kind of creature. All you can hear are her screams as the monster attacks her. Basically, this organism creature goes around using humans as its hosts. In the episode, the organism gets to Diana and eventually turns her into this monster with like large sharp teeth. Ugh. The monster itself is a big slimy creature with huge fangs and long tentacles. There are plenty of other horrifying creatures seen throughout the series, like the Boogeyman, a giant humanoid with red glowing eyes and 3 branches on his forehead, Hexen, a 15-foot tall eyeless creature, and the Mothman. No explanation needed for that one. And in our number 1 spot, we have Courage the Cowardly Dog. How on earth was I allowed to watch this show as a kid? From possession to demons and sadistic villains, this show is anything but kid-friendly. So this show is about Courage, a pinkish purple anthropomorphic dog, and his owners, Eustace and Muriel Bagg. Each episode, they are encountered by a paranormal or supernatural entity or force, and Courage, who is anything but courageous, has to save his owners. Now, this show is just filled with creepy villains, gore, and violence. One of the episodes that scared me as a kid was the one titled King Ramses' Curse. That's right, the Egyptian pharaoh makes an appearance in this episode. So Eustace ends up finding and keeping an ancient Egyptian slab. As a result, he is visited by King Ramses. The king appears outside their home and just sways back and forth, repeating in a creepy whisper, "Return the slab." That alone can send shivers down anyone's spine. Then you have the episode Freaky Fred, where Muriel's cousin Fred comes into town to visit. Fred looks insane with his creepy wide-mouthed smile and slanted eyebrows. What's even worse is that he has creepy inner dialogue that only the audience can hear, which, may I add, is entirely in rhymes. And then we find out that he has an obsession with shaving people until they are bald. He ends up getting locked in the bathroom with Courage, where he shaves off all of his fur. You can see Courage shaking in fear as Fred does the deed. And while this happens, sounds of creepy children singing fill the screen. And let's not forget about the episode where Muriel gets possessed. That's right, she gets possessed from demons in her mattress. In one scene, she is laughing menacingly while her head spins around in a circle before her head just falls off. In another scene, she opens her mouth and a giant bumpy tongue extends out and licks Eustace. Then she vomits green slime all over him. Obviously, it's a reference to the Exorcist movies. But in every episode, there is at least one scary or disturbing thing that happens.
Coming in at number 5, we have Beetlejuice. Beetlejuice aired back in the 90s and focused on the life of goth girl Lydia Dietz and her undead friend Beetlejuice as they explore the netherworld, a ghoulish, wacky, monster, supernaturalistic realm inhabited by ghosts, ghouls, goblins, and zombies. Like many spooky shows, it relied heavily on parodying famous films, books, and TV shows, including the episode Brides of Funkenstein, which is of course an homage to the Bride of Frankenstein, something most children would not pick up on, nor should they. Now, throughout the series, Beetlejuice attempts to scam residents of the netherworld as well as the real world, including an incident from babysitting in which he literally sits on the grotesque netherworld babies, to then trying to beat them in an auto race. Some episodes of the children's show are surprisingly self-aware, including the episode where he acts like the ghost with the most money as CEO of a huge TV station who has absolutely zero compassion. Saying all of this, the show is significantly tamer than the movie, with the cartoon version being portrayed as mischievous rather than outright malevolent. Saying that though, the show is a lot to handle for the average kid, but not me, because I'm Coming in at number 4, we have The Grim Adventures of Billy and Mandy. The Grim Adventures of Billy and Mandy is a cartoon that aired on the Cartoon Network back in the early 2000s and followed 2 children, Billy, a slow-witted happy-go-lucky boy, and Mandy, his dark and cynical best friend, who, after winning a limbo game to save Billy's pet hamster, gain the mighty Grim Reaper as their best friend in eternal servitude and slavery. Throughout the course of the show, Billy and Mandy use Grimm's supernatural abilities and powers to venture into supernatural locations, such as the underworld or the netherworld, inhabited by monstrous and grotesque beasts. Oh yeah, the show is also filled to the brim with body horror. saying that this is certainly not a show for faint-hearted children, even packs a punch as an adult. Now, Grim is terrifying to look at, with him being portrayed as the classic Grim Reaper, often wearing a long black robe with red on the hood. He's also around 6'6" and weighs only 77 pounds. Not to mention, he is also seen with his scythe, an object that is said to be of tremendous magical energy and power in the series, and the source of most of Grim's abilities and powers. It's also a weapon that can kill people. Coming in at number 3, we have Tales from the Cryptkeeper. Tales from the Cryptkeeper is an animated TV series which aired on YTV in Canada back in the 90s, and was based on the 1950s EC comic series Tales from the Crypt, as well as the live-action TV series of the same name. However, Tales from the Cryptkeeper was certainly milder, with it being made for children. However, saying that, it still managed to pack a punch and a lot of scares. The series details the Cryptkeeper telling different horror stories to the viewers, each with a lesson to be learned. Very educational. However, the episodes are genuinely twisted, with some of them being truly terrifying. For example, the episode Gorilla's Paw is essentially a retelling of W.W. Jacobs' The Monkey's Paw, which follows an unpopular kid who steals a gorilla's paw in order to be a part of a secret club, but he quickly discovers that the paw can grant wishes with twisted results. Or more terrifying still, the Haunted Mine episode, which follows a boy who visits his aunt, during which time he finds himself stuck inside of an abandoned mine, filled with unusual shapes and dark secrets. Spooky stuff. Coming in at number 2, Aaahh! Real Monsters. One of my favourite shows growing up, which says a lot. Aaahh! Real Monsters is a cartoon which aired on Nickelodeon and focused on 3 young monsters. Icus, Ablina and Crumb, who attend a school for monsters under a city dump and learn to frighten humans. The show still haunts me to this day, with it including some of the scariest monsters I've ever seen. That's a bit of a stretch, but I mean it. For example, Massage Monster, who looked like this, or the Library Monster, who looked like this. Lovely stuff and definitely child friendly. The show is garish but blissfully silly, with wildly perverse humour that many children would certainly not understand, nor should they. There is also Grumble, a tall green-blue monster with 2 tufts of hair, a beard and a tail, and wears a belt and a red pump on each of his 4 feet. Grumble's assistant is Zimbo, voiced by Tim Curry, a horror icon, who resembles a bee with 1 mammalian leg and a humanoid face with green hair, all sounding pretty frightening to a small child, right? Honestly, I still think about the show and how it affected my life. I think it really made me who I am as a person, which is royally in the head. I kind of love that though. And finally, coming in at number 1, Courage the Cowardly Dog. Courage the Cowardly Dog is an animated horror comedy series that aired on the Cartoon Network back in the late 90s/early 2000s. Now, the show follows the title character, a pink anthropomorphic dog who lives with an elderly couple in a farmhouse in the middle of nowhere. For the most part, in each episode, the trio are thrown into bizarre and disturbing misadventures, which tend to involve the paranormal and supernatural. However, for a show that is aimed towards children, it certainly had a fascination with dark, surreal humour and horror atmosphere. Now, the show successfully embraced all manner of horror, creating a show that lingered in the minds of many children for years. Some of the particularly chilling episodes included King Ramses' Curse, as well as the House of Discontent, the latter following the trio being plagued by poltergeists that need them to grow crops, otherwise they'll be forced to leave the farm. The series even dedicates a few episodes to classic horror movies which children would of course know nothing about, at the time anyway. For example, the episode Demon in the Mattress featured Muriel being possessed by a demonic mattress, a clear homage to The Exorcist, film certainly not made for children. Even now as an adult, it's hard not to feel an overwhelming sense of discomfort when watching Courage the Cowardly Dog.
Coming in at number 5, we've got Being Ian. Here's a Canadian deep cut for all of you. If you've seen this show, please let me know. I have no idea what the viewer base is actually like. It seems like there's a big internet blind spot on it. I loved this series growing up because it was all about a kid who loved to make movies. I aspired to be like Ian, roping my friends into half-ass harebrained productions featuring ninjas and weird video game references, and inexplicably a lot of discussions surrounding the creation of food and drink. Most episodes were built around references to classic movies, stuff like Indiana Jones, Jaws, Invasion of the Body Snatchers. Hell, I even think there was a Citizen Kane episode at one point. But one stands out above the rest and really activated my creepy senses. Scream Because I Know What You Did to That Psycho Last Summer. What a title, eh? Of course, it was a big old mishmash of a bunch of well-known horror movies, and this also describes the episode itself. Now, if you're going into a horror movie, you expect people to get killed off in all sorts of creative ways, but when you're watching a cartoon, not likely. Ian and his family are on a road trip, and some odd happenings begin, well, happening. People start disappearing with little to no explanation, and as the journey continues, the disappearances become more sinister. Nods to the movies referenced in the title are everywhere, but a kid is less likely to understand these references. They just see a bunch of horror movie highlights claiming the lives of innocent cartoon characters. In the end, there's a wild reveal akin to the ending of the original Psycho. This is something that nobody in theaters back in 1960 were ready for, let alone a bunch of media illiterate children. So needless to say, kids should be warned before diving into this episode. Thankfully, it ends on a positive note, but still. Coming in at number 4, we've got the marvelous misadventures of Flapjack. My goodness, is this ever a strange show. I think it made a big name for itself largely through hyper-realistic cutaways and stills. The characters are all fun and games from a distance, but once the hypothetical camera cuts in real close, there can be some very disturbing discoveries. We follow the marvelous misadventures of a young lad named Flapjack, raised by a whale and dropped off at a rough and tumbled pirate-filled harbor. Flapjack is looked after by an old pirate named Knuckles, who convinces him to ditch his peaceful life and join him on his quest to find the Candied Island. Lesson 1. Don't follow weird old men with promises of candy. There's always something weird going on, and young Flapjack never seems to notice. This often leads to questionable and often disturbing situations. Pirates and other surly sailors aren't often known for their good behavior and friendliness, and this is on full display in the harbor. Crime and violence are abound, and that's only the start of it. There's one particularly famous instance of terror that stems from an odd little cat. Flapjack, being the incorrigible young lad he is, sights a little cat and goes to play with it. Here's what the cat looked like up close. What? On a kids show? This isn't the only creepypasta-worthy image to come from the show either. Here's another one with Flapjack himself being the object of terror. And here's one just for fun. A young boy interacting with Flapjack who turns out to be 38. Just look at it. My word, they've really mastered the creepy cut-in, haven't they? I must say, this all seems like a lot for kids to take in. Coming in at number 3, we've got Hey Arnold. Now let's ignore everyone's odd head shapes and the fact that Arnold makes Helga's girlhood tremble for a moment. These are inappropriate topics for another day. Instead, we'll look at some of the wildest, scariest moments from the show supposedly meant for children. Living in an inner city tenement comes with its fair share of modern horrors like crime and poverty and lack of air conditioning, but Hey Arnold packs in more than a few horror movie scares as well. Take the haunted train, for example. Arnold and his friends come across a ghastly locomotive complete with scar-covered, accordion-toting spirit who promises to take them all to hell. Are you allowed to say that on kids' TV? Then there's Wheeze and Ed, the charcoal-scratched, fear-inspiring gangster from years gone by. Introducing kids to a Goonies-style treasure buried by a serial strangler? Nightmare fuel. And of course, there's the Ghost Bride. No cop-out here, this is as real as ghost stories can get. In a cartoon anyways. It's a tale of revenge where a woman literally axe murders her ex-fiancé before committing suicide herself. She was even found humming Here Comes the Bride before taking her life. Goodness gracious. So while it seems like a fun and safe cartoon on the surface, Hey Arnold packs in enough urban legends, ghost stories, and hard knocks to convince a kid the world is a scary place. Maybe that's not the worst lesson out there. Coming in at number 2, we've got the grim adventures of Billy and Mandy. Unfortunately, my meme-addled brain can't think about this show without thinking, Buenos dias, Mandy! But I digress. This is a television show about the literal embodiment of death following around a couple of school-aged children. Come on. It's crazy how many different horrors the creators can pack into every episode of this show. Like, the first episode is literally about preventing death from taking a hamster, which is already a weird lesson about the sanctity of life. From there, we meet all sorts of creatures that most folks would probably never want to come face to face with. Jeff the spider desperately pining for Billy's love, an alternate universe Pinocchio who's hungry for flesh, a cosmic terror in Nurgle Jr., and more. These are all monsters that, if shown to the right kid, could cause nightmares for life. And it doesn't stop there. The Grim Adventures of Billy and Mandy is also chock full of some absolutely wicked body horror. They pull no punches. Often, Billy will end up as a slapstick punchline, but unlike most cartoons, there are bloody, gutty consequences to each action. It's kind of like watching an episode of Itchy and Scratchy if that was a real television program. We get to see Billy's skin pulled back in every which way, his nose gets digested, every limb is grotesquely twisted, his eyes are sometimes pulled out of his head and more. And that's just Billy. Some side characters are subjected to similar levels of pain. All in all, while largely goofy and silly, there are some really funky images and situations here, and some kids might not be able to handle them. Those Those kids might be the ones who need to see it most though. And finally at number 1, we've got Ren and Stimpy. Speaking of abhorrent images, beloved by kids and animators alike, Ren and Stimpy is a truly unique and fascinating watch. However, there are so many questionable moments and creepy over-detailed close-ups in the show, it's a miracle any child grew up normal, whatever normal means. Now, this series is no stranger to controversy. Throughout its lifespan, Ren and Stimpy had episodes altered, censored, and outright cancelled due to violent, disturbing, and oftentimes lewd content. Years later, there was even a spin-off called Ren and Stimpy Adult Party Cartoon, where they really leaned into those less appropriate themes. I suppose we'll focus on the original run for this video, as it did originally air on Nickelodeon. I mentioned body horror earlier in this video, and when it comes to animated violence that makes you want to jump out of your skin, nobody does it like Ren and Stimpy. One time, Ren literally took a pair of tweezers and yanked the nerve endings out of his gums. Yes, it is as uncomfortable as it sounds. There's a gag where a jester trapped in some gallows cheese grates his arms, which results in a particularly detailed close-up of his bloody elbow, squeezes a lemon on it, and then tops it all off with salt. Why? Other gags include the removal of one's skin to go skinny dipping, a detailed explanation of how exactly Ren will kill Stimpy and his cousin, repeated eyeball poking and gouging, and the extremely grody and detailed depiction of flesh-eating parasites. And that doesn't even begin to cover it all. It's gross, it's creepy, it's unsettling, it's fascinating. Kids love it, but it might mess them up.
Number 5, all the Rugrats are dead. So when it comes to this fan theory, it turns out all those adorable little ones on Rugrats were nothing more than the projections of a year-old's psychological breakdown. Angelica is typically the character we all hated when we were younger, but in retrospect, she clearly has some pretty extreme neglect issues with her parents. Her mom is always on the phone with work, and her relationship with her dad is superficial at best. We all thought Angelica was just moody because of her age and spoiled upbringing, but here it's said that her attitude is actually due to the traumatic events of the Rugrats' deaths. The Rugrats were really a figment of Angelica's demonic and unimaginable imagination. Try saying that 5 times fast. Apparently Chucky died in 1986 along with his mother. That's why Chaz is a nervous wreck all the time. Tommy was born in 1988, but didn't make it past birth, which is why Stu is constantly in the basement making toys for the son who never had a chance to live. The DeVilles terminated a pregnancy in 1990, and Angelica couldn't figure out what the gender should be, so the twins were just sort of gender to be determined. As for all grown up, the teenage Angelica became addicted to various narcotics, which further aggravated her schizophrenia, bringing her back to her childhood and thus her creations she obsessed over. Because of the time lapse between the present and the last time she interacted with her creations, she made them older. Now, Angelica was apparently constantly taking hits of so she would never have to live without her creations, who were her only company. In a judgmental world, Angelica's mom actually passed away of a spicy spoon juice overdose in 1982, just after Angelica was born, and Drew in his depression married a gold-digging that Angelica idolized because she fooled herself into thinking it was her real mom, but always had a concept of her mom, Cynthia, and took a Barbie doll and made it after her mom's image, wearing an unwashed orange dress and having, messy hair, which is why she was so attached to it. Later in life, like I said, she followed her mom's footsteps with all those bad things, dying of overdose at age barely teens when All Grown Up was cancelled. The only Rugrat to not be fictional, however, was Dill. However, Angelica didn't know the difference between Dill and her creations, although Dill didn't follow her commands. After endless crying and a refusal to disappear like the others did when Angelica was angry with them, she took out her anger on him. And due to this, he sustained a brain hemorrhage, which resulted in a deformation. And as he grew up, his damage only became more evident, and by the time he was, made it to all grown up age, he lived as an outcast, being ridiculed for his weirdness. The immense guilt over this is what led Angelica to her, no snow and spicy spoon juice use, and uncreate the Rugrats briefly, until her experiences with hallucinogenics. On a pair-strip-to-find love, Chaz married a woman named Kira. He was actually going to marry a different woman named Coco, but she just wanted him for his money, who had a daughter named Kimmy that was torn from her because she was a no-snow addict. Now, Angelica imagined her from Kira's stories. Chaz lost his mind after the death of his wife and was in denial that she was ever a woman of the night. So upon to America, Chaz and Kira married, and she got her green card. It was actually a really happy and romantic story. Kira sadly continually struggled with addiction, but was apparently relatively happy with her life in Chaz. Susie was Angelica's only real friend, who entertained the thought of Angelica's creations, for, her sake. Angelica spent the last days of her life in the back of the school cafeteria, imagining friends around her and playing with the lives of her creations. Yeah, my brain hurts. Why did she imagine, little ones and not folks her own age? Well, since her relationship is mostly non-existent with her parents, the only time they show any kind of emotion towards her is when they're disciplining her, which to a neglected little one comes off as cruelty. She imagines them as, young, because she needs someone someone she can be an authority figure with, because that's the only relationship that Angelica understands. Yeah, my brain's spinning. Number 4, Ed, and Eddy all live in purgatory. These theories really have a way of turning innocent shows into eerie mysteries. Some theorists propose that these 3 misfits are stuck in purgatory. It's a haunting concept, suggesting that their afterlife is intertwined with their traumatic pasts. Rolf, the first to arrive in this eerie realm, brought his farm life with him, choosing to neglect the cattle to play with the other lost souls. Then there's Johnny, who befriended Rolf, and even in death, he's joined by his imaginary friend Plank as they wander aimlessly through the afterlife. Eddy, the schemer from New York, met his end when a swindling attempt went awry, drowning in the river, and even now he's still chasing the almighty dollar. The brother and sister, Sarah and Ed, came next, both escaping the chaos of World War II in their unique ways, but a car wreck in 1953 ended their lives. Naz, the flower power human of the late 60s, met a gruesome end at the hands of a serial ender. Trauma caused her to shut out family in the afterlife, giving her more time to party and flirt. Ed, the intellectual with controlling parents, met his demise in a fiery explosion caused by a Bunsen burner. Kevin, the angry and cynical boy from a broken home, was sadly physically punished to death by his very bad father, and in the afterlife he changed his perception of his father but continued his bullying ways. Jimmy, the sickly, little one, died of leukemia, isolated in his room, neglected by the outside world. And then there are the Canker sisters, sent from hell to torment the neighborhood. Their demonic origins grant them supernatural abilities, making them feared by everyone, including the Eds. Hey, this purgatory theory adds quite the sinister layer to the quirky world of Ed, and Eddy, wouldn't you think? Number 3, Garfield is hallucinating. Oh, okay. Garfield is one of my favorite comic strips of all time, but in the fall of 1989, Jim Davis produced a series of Halloween-based strips about Garfield waking up to an abandoned house. When Garfield finally accepted that he was alone, he suddenly brought back to his owner John's house. Naturally, the storyline had several readers question the meaning behind these series of strips, and because of these strips' surreality regarding the Halloween story arc, it is commonly believed that Garfield had either died or that he's slowly starving to death, and that the entire strip is his dying dream. Look, this theory does make sense in some places. Throughout the strip, Garfield would often have dreams regarding food and would constantly beg John for his trademark dish, lasagna. So if Garfield's always begging for food and just wants to sleep, oh dear. Number 2, Ash Ketchum has been in a coma since the first episode. So Pokemon is still airing new episodes all the time and follows the adventures of, Ash Ketchum and Pikachu! I don't know a lot about Pokemon, so we're gonna try our best here. Despite over 20 years though of adventures, Ash never really gets much older, and he somehow keeps discovering more and more and more new Pokemon that the world didn't know about in earlier seasons. And that's because those new Pokemon at the time didn't exist. This theory even explains some of the peculiarities of the Pokemon world, such as the consistent presence of certain characters like Nurse Joy and Officer Jenny. So for example, in the very first episode, Ash and Pikachu are attacked by a flock of Spearows in a thunderstorm when, Pikachu blasts everything in the area with a massive jolt of electricity, with Ash at ground zero of said attack. But then he walks off into the sunset like he didn't just sustain a, near lethal electrocution. Or so we all thought apparently. The analysis of Ash's companions and rivals as aspects of himself is a unique interpretation. From Brock representing his repressed sexuality to Gary Oak as a wish fulfillment figure, it offers a fresh perspective on the relationships and character dynamics within the series. The theory also delves into the symbolism of the Pokemons themselves, with each of Ash's Pokemons representing different aspects of his personality and struggles. It's an intriguing way to look at the creatures he befriends and, trains on his journey. Not only are Ash's Pokemon a manifestation of different parts of himself, the Pokemon of other trainers are as well. Koffing and Ekans were symbolic of Team Rocket's willingness to change, hence their evolutions. Once his mind was able to overcome that roadblock and allow them to change once, it gave him the chance to truly change. An interesting note is that Piputar is a rationalization, a Pokemon's rival caught before they met. Even Ash would become suspicious if everyone he met had no carryover Pokemon from previous places he had been to. Now, other trainers are more direct forms of his issues, ones he must either come to terms with or outright suppress. Gym leaders are more primary aspects of his personality, with each Pokemon being stronger than the last to display a level of skill he could only be capable of if he gave into it. In effect, every time he is doing battle with a part of him that he would rather not have in control. Originally, Ash had the battles, which evolved into team battles and contests, and the explanation for this is that his issues became more and more complicated, and the means of dealing with them needed to become more complex as well. The fact that he uses issues he has already dominated to win is a sign he's growing stronger. Ash releases his Pokemon because his mind is forcing him to, let go of them. The second he raises an overpowered team, a tournament comes up, and after fighting his way through it, he has to go to a new land for new challenges. However, with an overpowered team, there won't be any challenges or any way to motivate him further. The Ash that wants to stay in the coma and keep journeying hands his solved issues over to Professor Oak so he can continue and overcome the unresolved ones, which is, essentially his mind forcing him to to deal with his issues. Ash's rivals in the Elite Four are ultimately the strongest part of this cycle. Having Pokemon that are essentially godlike, they represent both what can be attained and what is unattainable. Ash's rivals are all possible futures he envisions for himself, because they're all older than him. The theory's conclusion, where Ash awakens from his coma, either to face a world that has moved on without him, or to continue his journey with a newfound determination, is kind of a poignant and thought-provoking scenario. It leaves us with the idea that sometimes our dreams and desires can become a powerful driving force in our lives. In the end, this theory kind of provides a unique and complex interpretation of the Pokemon series, turning it into a tale of self-discovery and growth within the confines of a dream world. Honestly, that kind of checks. Number 1, cars overthrew mankind. It's not often that crazy fan theories are confirmed by higher-ups that are actually involved with the franchise. No matter how sound a conspiracy may be, it's often left up to fans to decide for themselves without any real answers. But in the case of the Cars movie and franchise, a disturbing theory was actually confirmed by the creative director himself, Jay Ward. So the theory goes that in the universe of Cars, we don't see humans because they simply don't exist anymore. When the Cars became sentient beings, they realized there was no need for humans and they them all. And to add insult to injury, Ward confirmed that the cars in fact take on the personality of the last person who drove them. So this seems to imply that the cars somehow literally consumed all of the people in the world and took on their personalities. So would this make them soul-sucking cars? Well, it doesn't get much worse than that. Hi, iRobot. You're looking pretty familiar right now. Also, when it comes to overall Disney curse things, does anybody remember the fly from The Emperor's New Groove? Just a little sidebar here. The fly that gets killed by the spider while screaming, "Help me, help me." Okay, well, did anybody notice how the only animals that can talk in the movie are the ones that were once human? That means that the spider ate a human. The more reason not to like the little creeps.
Coming in at number 5, we have I'm Sorry Donkey. Shrek. He is the titular protagonist of the Shrek franchise, Fiona's husband, Donkey and Puss's best friend, and the ogre triplets' father, not to mention the son-in-law of Queen Lillian and King Harold. That's a lot of a lot. Shrek is a green ogre with brown eyes. He wears a white long-sleeve tunic within his brown turtle-designed mini vest, brown pinstripe pants, and dark short boots with a rip-folded design in each side. Some backstory to the character though: Shrek was born to an unnamed father and mother. His father was known to be a cannibal, even trying to eat his own son about 30 years prior to when he rescued Fiona. He lived with his parents until his 7th birthday before moving out and living in a swamp in the middle of the forest by himself. Now posted to Reddit by Kira Queen Stando Power, we have quite the interesting take on Shrek. He has been transformed into a monstrous beast with multiple heads all connected via tentacles. He walks on his 4 clawed legs with a sharp tail at the end of his body. Honestly, Shrek would be a completely different story if Donkey stumbled across this Shrek swamp instead of the normal one. This is absolutely horrible. But you know what's worse? The replies to this post. In at number 4 we have Barney. Oh, Barney, I loved him growing up. I had every movie on VHS, with Barney 1, 2, 3, 4 seasons being a personal fave. Just saying. Anyway, the older I've gotten, the less and less I trust this giant pink purple dinosaur, and I'm apparently not the only one who feels this way. Some backstory though: Barney the dinosaur is the main protagonist of Barney and Friends, and a 200 million year old 6 foot tall purple pink dinosaur with a green belly and green spots on his back and his tail and yellow toes. This dude comes to life through a child's imagination and is best known for his silly and optimistic attitude. I don't know what it is about Barney, but since getting older I just don't trust him anymore. This dude is sinister and we all know it. But thanks to Reddit user Dominic_V, we get to see what that looks like in the flesh. In his art piece, he created a Godzilla-sized Barney who is prowling the streets of a metropolitan city, presumably looking for children to feast upon. He also looks as though he is brainwashing the entire world, forcing us to believe his weird ideologies. So not to mention... I can't say it. I can't say it. Sometimes saying nothing is better than saying anything at all. Sometimes. In at number 3 we have Sailor Moon. Sailor Moon, known in Japan as Pretty Soldier, is a 1992 Japanese anime television series based on the manga of the same name written by Naoko Takeuchi that was published back in 1991. The series follows the adventures of the protagonist Usagi Toskino, a middle school student who was given the power to become the titular Sailor Soldier. If I'm butchering these names, just know I've never watched this show, so sue me. Joined by other sailor soldiers, they defend Earth against an assortment of evil villains. The anime also parallels the maturation of Usagi from an emotional middle school girl to a responsible young adult. Usagi is the superheroine who is also the main protagonist of the series. She is a carefree schoolgirl who can transform into Sailor Moon, the de facto leader of the Sailor Soldiers. Initially believing herself to be an ordinary girl, she is later revealed to be the reincarnated form of the Princess of the Moon Kingdom, and she subsequently discovers her original name, Princess Serenity. For the most part, we all grew up watching Sailor Moon. Not me though. Never watched a single episode in my life, and I'm great. I turned out great. And dreaming that we could one day be like Usagi. However, thanks to this art piece by Reddit user Mark Skull, I no longer feel that way. Here she is depicted as some kind of eldritch horror, a monster that is uncanny, unearthly, and supernatural. To be honest, part of me thinks I actually prefer her this way. If the show was this, maybe I would have watched it. Just saying. Missed opportunity. I've got no time for Sailor Moon. You know who I also don't have time for? The Powerpuff Girls, so never liked them. Coming in at number 2, I'm Sorry Luigi, I Missed. Both Mario and Luigi hail from video games created and released by Nintendo, created by prominent game designer Shigeru Miyamoto. Now Mario is the company's mascot, as well as being the eponymous protagonist of the series. He has appeared in over 200 video games since his creation. Mario is depicted as a short, pudgy Italian plumber who resides in the Mushroom Kingdom, with his adventures usually centering upon the rescuing of Princess Peach from the Koopa villain Bowser. Along the way, Mario was joined by his fraternal twin brother and sidekick Luigi. Luigi is the slighter younger but taller brother to Mario and appears in many games throughout the Mario franchise, often as the sidekick to his older brother. Originally developed as a palette swap of Mario with a green colour scheme instead of red, Luigi has since developed a personality and style of his own. As his role in the Mario series progressed, Luigi has since evolved into a physically distinct character, taller and thinner than his brother. Now Yoshi on the other hand is a fictional dinosaur who also appears alongside the two brothers as their sidekick, but thanks to Reddit user Young Drew, I don't think I'll ever be able to look at him the same way again. In this art piece, he is depicted as a xenomorph from the Alien franchise, the fictional endoparasitoid extraterrestrial species and one of the deadliest of all known alien species. In the art piece, he has taken Mario, Luigi and Toad hostage, with Luigi already a goner. He's completely dead. There's an alien in his mouth. One awful way to go out. R.I.P. Luigi. It's actually quite beautiful, to be honest. Better than any game. And finally, coming in at number 1, we have SpongeBob. You were all so thrilled that I didn't include SpongeBob on the first part of our list. But considering I love to ruin lives and crush dreams, I decided to include him on part 2. No need to thank me, you're welcome. SpongeBob is of course the titular character from the Nickelodeon series SpongeBob SquarePants, a comedy cartoon that chronicles the adventures and endeavours of SpongeBob and his aquatic friends in the fictional underwater city of Bikini Bottom. Its success has made it one of the longest running animated series in history. It is also the highest rated series to air on Nickelodeon and Viacom CBS Domestic Media Networks' most distributed property. That being said, I dislike this show with a passion, and I particularly dislike SpongeBob himself. He is a childish sea sponge who lives in a pineapple under the sea, with his pet snail Gary. He works as a fry cook at the Krusty Krab, a job which he is exceptionally skilled at. However, I don't care about that, I still dislike him. He is a good-natured sponge and loves to hang out with his best friend Patrick, his teacher Mrs. Puffin, and his boss Mr. Krabs. All well and good, but like I said, I have no time for this sea sponge. He is sinister, we all know it. But I'm here to expose him right here and right now. One Reddit user by the name of the Paranoid Artist also gets the same vibe as me, because he created this incredibly disturbing art piece which shows an overweight SpongeBob with a slew of empty beer cans next to him. He appears to be angry, judging by his intense expression and bulging red eyes. Honestly, I can't look at this picture for longer than a few seconds because I have a feeling this might possess someone. Feels like a chain letter. If you don't pass it on, something terrible will happen to you and your entire family. Anyway, I'm off to share this with every person I know, just in case. Also because I hate everyone and everyone needs to look at it.
Kicking us off at number 5, we've got CatDog. CatDog is an abomination and you can't convince me otherwise. It's literally a cat and a dog fused at the midsection. Whatever genetic experiment spawned this must have been gruesome. They share a body, but it's not so simple as them always acting together and experiencing the same things. No. How do they use the bathroom? Why are they so stretchy? Tell me how they have two separate immune systems. I need to know. These are all things that my gigantic, pure as snow child brain couldn't comprehend way back in the day. In fact, I think most folks were so focused on the goofy aspects of the show that they totally glossed over some of the more disturbing fare. See, CatDog is a lot more body horror than one might remember. Of course, they spend a lot of time in each other's mouths, like a nasty Ouroboros of sorts. This was taken to an extreme once, where Cat crawls through their body, sheds his skin, and pops out through Dog's mouth like some sort of permutation of the Thing. All of this after they started doing awful, torturous things to each other's teeth. And they made this for kids. In another episode, Dog becomes insanely buff, like so much so that it reminds me a little bit of the beefy Joker fight from Arkham Asylum. And it's not just like Dog gets big and lives his life. He gets huge, takes power from Cat, and then goes on a crazy roid-style rage bender. Then there was that time that CatDog was forcibly turned into one of the most hideous clowns of all time. That was fun. CatDog is such a crazy creature to start with, and in classic Nickelodeon style, it gets taken to some weird nightmare fuel extremes. Kids have powerful imaginations and are more likely to accept whatever's thrown their way, but geez, imagine running into a real-life version of this hybrid hellion. Coming in at number 4, we've got Angelica's worst nightmare. On that note, let's discuss another Nickelodeon nightmare. Remember Rugrats? I'd always thought the babies were a little funny looking, and some of the adults were hideous, of course, but none of that ever truly bothered me. Maybe the hairless Cynthia doll caused some negative reactions, but otherwise it's just a goofy kids show. Well, most of the time. See, Angelica is a bit of a loudmouth with a lot of opinions on things that her brain can't possibly comprehend. But what she does know is that babies are terrifying, especially when they can take over your life. As a parent, a baby can be either a blessing or a curse, depending on how you look at it. For a spoiled only child, it is the end of the glory days. And through these very same child-sized eyes, a baby sibling can be a terrifying monster, which is exactly what Angelica dreams up in her worst nightmare. Angelica's mother, Charlotte, brings up the possibility of having another baby, spooking the heck out of her daughter. After realizing that her folks will have less time to pay attention to the most important person, her, Angelica descends into a deep, dark nightmare. Babies. Who needs them, right? In this bad dream, nobody recognizes Angelica. They're all too focused on the new baby. And this baby is a real monster. First of all, it is ugly. And you might think that I have some sort of prejudice against babies and their looks, but no. This is just an especially ugly Rugrat. Then it speaks in the voice of a full-grown man, telling young Angelica that she's gotta skedaddle. From here, this little baby grows to the size of an adult and chases her around the house. The growth doesn't stop here either, and eventually it's a big enough baby to pick up a car and swallow Angelica whole. That is indeed monstrous. It's animated in such a stilted way, too. It's an absolutely terrifying procession of images, and while it's a relatively common story for kids about to gain new siblings, it is wholly disturbing in many ways. Coming in at number 3, we've got Earthmover. Now, there are plenty of different villains to choose from in the Batman universe. Some are scarier than others, with standouts like Scarecrow and Professor Pig really dialing up the horror. However, a lot of the biggest, baddest villains are left out or neutered in the animated versions of Batman. If you want grit or gore, head to the comics. If you want to work on your Bane impression, find Tom Hardy. But every once in a while, some real makes it into the animated series. This is especially apparent in Batman Beyond. Of course, the art style is much darker than a lot of the other comic book series, but the real horror comes from the futuristic technology that is so often employed. Bane overdoses on his own venom, and the Joker leaves folks with terrifying grins, and there's all sorts of surprising body horror in Beyond. But it's hard to imagine a monster more terrifying than Earthmover. At the climax of this story, we learn that a man that we once presumed was dead is actually totally dead. In fact, his daughter discovers his emaciated corpse. However, he's managed to become undead with the help of copious amounts of chemical waste. His remains are reanimated by some filthy materials, and he begins to rampage. Somehow the chemicals keep his spirit alive and attached to this rotten body and grant him additional powers as well. This corpse dad even summons a giant monster made of earth to kidnap and hold his daughter hostage. The episode even ends with very little closure, so like all good horror movie villains, we don't know exactly what became of Earthmover. His glowing green eyes will remain burned into my soul forever though. Coming in at number 2, we've got Larry da Bug. Forgive me if you don't recall this creature, but I had to bring him up. Technically, Larry himself isn't a cartoon, he's a puppet, but he introduces tale after terrifying tale in an anthology series that probably molded my young mind more than I realized. Larry DeBug is one of two hosts hanging out at Ted's Diner, a retro restaurant in the middle of nowhere. The other is a slimy maggot named Maurice, but I digress. This is the starting place for many of the animated tales of horror that make up the YTV series Freaky Story. This awful blue beetle has more stories than you can imagine, always prefaced with, "This is a true story. It happened to a friend of mine." And while Larry himself might not be all that scary, at least if you're not afraid of puppets or bugs, the spooky potential is always there. The stories told range all over, from freaky misfortune to fiendish creatures to disgusting foods. Each one is animated in a unique style, and like with any anthology, there are gems and duds, but the possibility of watching something truly horrific was always there. And like Larry always says, just because they never happened doesn't mean they ain't true. And finally at number 1, we've got the walrus. Oh man. Picture this. You're a kid at home watching a lovely Swiss animated program on VHS. Or maybe you're at a friend's house and taking in some television. Either way, a friendly, sassy, adorable claymation penguin has your attention. It's Pingu. What a classic, right? Newt and all that jazz. You're learning about sharing and forgiveness and respecting your parents when all of a sudden something every child fears happens. Pingu gets lost. It's a dream sequence, but still. Kids don't know how to navigate. They freak out when they can't find their parents. This is already a scary situation. But for those of us who thought that would be the fearful peak, what happened next was almost unimaginable. While lost, out of nowhere, a gigantic walrus appears. And this is no cute, cuddly, mustachioed fellow. This is a terrifying, uncanny valley monstrosity. It's almost obscene how awful it looks. This walrus has big glossy eyes, a nasty mustache, and worst of all, human teeth. Compared to literally anything else in the Pingu universe, this walrus is the embodiment of all nightmares. Add in an evil, deep and dark laugh and you've got a monster that will never leave any child's mind. Why did they design it like this? Why did it appear out of nowhere? Why was this episode so upsetting to children everywhere? We may never know. But by all means, return to watching your cute penguin show with the knowledge that at any moment a revolting beast may climb up out of the background. My goodness. Most of these shows were largely palatable to all audiences, lulling viewers into a false sense of security before sucker punching them with scares. I'm sure plenty of neuroses found their root here.
Coming in at number 5, we have Mickey Mouse. Mickey Mouse is the oldest Disney cartoon, with him being the mascot of the Walt Disney Company, with him being created back in 1928. The famous anthropomorphic mouse wears red shorts, large yellow shoes, and white gloves, and is one of the world's most recognizable characters. Back in 1955, a television series was created about the character titled The Mickey Mouse Club, running up until 1996. Mickey generally appears alongside his girlfriend Minnie Mouse, his pet dog Pluto, his friends Donald Duck and Goofy, and his nemesis Pete, among others. Though originally crafted as a cheeky, lovable rogue, he has since become a nice guy, usually seen as an honest and bodacious hero. However, views may change about him when you see this piece of art posted by Fallen Guardian 2 on Reddit. The image shows Mickey Mouse as a butcher, chopping up pieces of pig and presumably his friends. The artist aptly titled it, "I don't know about this meat. It has a bit of a goofy aftertaste." Yikes, Mickey has lost his damn mind. Honestly, if the Mickey Mouse Club went down this route, I'd be an avid viewer. What a concept, a murderous Mickey Mouse. R.I.P. Goofy. Coming in at number 4, we have Thomas the Tank Engine. Now, this is one of the most terrifying things I have ever seen. I absolutely hate it so very much. Thomas the Tank Engine is an anthropomorphized fictional steam locomotive in the Railway series books and eventual TV spin-off series Thomas and Friends. He is a steam engine and has a number 1 painted on his side. The show features the train going on adventures with his fellow locomotives on the island of Soda. However, Thomas is apt to get into trouble by trying too hard to be, in his words, a really useful engine, attempting to do things that are best left to bigger engines. Other members of Sir Topham Hatt's Railway include Junior Engine Percy, Thomas's best friend, who is always willing to help, and Big Engine Gordon, the fastest and most powerful member of the team, who uses his superior strength to help smaller engines get out of trouble. Now, the train is nothing but friendly, but as we know, the internet is an incredibly dark place place, and some folks out there have created monstrosities out of the train, including Tom Corbin, who posted this video to TikTok. The video seems to show Thomas chasing after the train controller, Sir Topham Hatt. However, Thomas is horrifically mutated and has spider legs stemming from both sides of his train as he chases down the man. Honestly, the more I watch, the scarier it gets. Coming in at number 3, we have The Fairly OddParents. The Fairly OddParents was an animated series on Nickelodeon which followed Timmy Turner, a 10-year-old boy with 2 fairy godparents named Cosmo and Wanda, and a malevolent 16-year-old babysitter named Vicky. Now, the godparents were not granting magical wishes, remain innocuous in their fishbowl, swimming around with tiny crowns atop their heads and wands in their hands. However, one artist turned this into something absolutely terrifying. I hate it, but I also can't look away. The picture titled, "I'm sorry Timmy, I forgot to feed your fish," which seemingly shows a dead Cosmo and a very much alive Wanda. However, she now has a human-looking face full of sinister intent. She has clearly eaten Cosmo. She got a little hungry, I guess. One Reddit user responded, "The artist of the post stated, I quote, 'It is a cruel world. Survival of the fittest is very much the rule rather than the exception. Unfortunately, Cosmo was very much not the fittest. He wasn't smart, particularly powerful, nor a good mate. Thus he had no further value other than as dinner. Do not cry, Timmy. Cosmo isn't completely gone. He is now part of me, and judging by the fact you just finished your dinner, part of you as well.'" Jesus, that sent chills up and down my spine. Wanda's lost it, but I like Wanda like this. And finally, coming in at number 1, we have Garfield. Garfield is a beloved comic strip and children's cartoon that was originally created by Jim Davis. It chronicles the life of the title character Garfield the cat, John Arbuckle, his human owner, and Odie, the dog. Now, the first show starring the orange cat was Garfield and Friends, which premiered back in 1988 and ran up until 1994. Now, like the comic strip, the show followed the catastrophic comedy capers of the wisecrapping, nap-taking, and lasagna-loving cat Garfield. It was a hit, resulting in more spin-offs and even a movie. However, since the beginning of his creation, there have been dark theories surrounding the beloved cat, who now spans over 40 years. Now, one dark theory, which is actually more of a meme, is titled, "I'm Sorry John," which refers to a series of Garfield-inspired artwork in which Garfield is depicted as a horror creature stalking his owner, with most of the art stating the words, "I'm sorry John," and "I require lasagna." It became such a hit across the web that in 2018 the character was featured in the SCP Foundation as SCP-3166, which is absolutely crazy. Following that, on September 18th, 2018, horror artist William Burke posted a black and white drawing of the cat on Instagram. It depicted Garfield as a monster holding his owner John Arbuckle in his hands and demanding to be given lasagna. Another creation shows a rotund Garfield completely out of control with his eating habits, who has now resorted to cannibalism. In the sketch, he appears to resemble a walrus more than a cat, and I can't help but think back to the movie Tusk. That film still haunts me in all the right ways. Honestly, if this is how Garfield looked, maybe I would have given his show the time of day. Another drawing shows Garfield resembling a creature from The Thing, stating the words, "I'm sorry, John." Honestly, will someone just feed this cat lasagna so he doesn't kill us all?